For Humvee turret gunners in Iraq, surviving an ambush wasn't measured in minutes, but in seconds, 30 on average, before enemy fire found them. Young Americans stood exposed from the chest up in vehicles built for the Cold War, not for street fighting, while insurgents made killing the gunner their first priority. How did America's most iconic military truck become a moving target? And why did their commanders let it happen? The answer starts with an engineering choice no one imagined would cost so many lives. The Humvee's frame was born from a different battlefield. Its flat steel underbody, designed for ground clearance and off-road mobility, ran parallel to the earth with no curve or angle to deflect force. When a roadside bomb detonated beneath the vehicle, the blast shot straight upward, channeling energy through the thin floor and into the crew compartment. There was nothing to redirect or absorb the explosion, just a flat sheet of metal between the ground and the soldiers inside. Above, the turret was a simple circular opening cut into the roof. The gunner stood upright, waist deep in the vehicle, with shoulders, arms, and head exposed to the sky. Early models offered no shield at all. Later, some units bolted on steel plates or plexiglass, but these were often makeshift and left wide gaps. From street level, the gunner's silhouette was the first thing visible through the dust and heat. The side panels and doors were made from lightweight aluminum or even canvas, meant to save weight for speed, not to stop bullets or shrapnel. The open turret meant that in an ambush, the gunner's upper body became the aiming point for every rifle, every RPG, every fragment of a roadside bomb. The Humvee's engineering, once celebrated for versatility, now offered a perfect line of fire to anyone waiting in the alleys of Baghdad or the ruins of Fallujah. When American forces crossed into Iraq in March 2003, military planners expected a short, decisive campaign. The strategy called for speed, columns of Humvees and trucks racing ahead to topple Saddam Hussein's regime, then shifting quickly to stabilization. The vehicles rolling north were mostly unarmored, designed for supply runs and troop transport in the open deserts of the Cold War, not for the close quarters fighting of city streets. In those first weeks, the roads remained mostly quiet, but by summer, the landscape had changed. Homemade bombs began appearing along highways and alleys, improvised explosive devices built from artillery shells, buried under trash, or hidden in the wreckage of burned-out cars. Early incident logs from Baghdad and Fallujah traced a sharp rise in these attacks, catching American commanders off guard. The Humvee, once seen as a symbol of American mobility, now became a target. Insurgents learned quickly. The open turret was the weak point. They aimed their fire and explosives at the gunners, knowing that taking out the man behind the machine gun could silence an entire convoy. The plans drawn up in briefing rooms back home unraveled on the ground, as the enemy adapted faster than anyone expected. The vehicle that promised safety through speed now offered little more than a thin shell and a clear shot for anyone lying in wait. By late 2004, nearly 19,000 Humvees were operating on Iraqi roads. Of those, only about 5,000 had factory-installed armor. The rest rolled out with little more than thin metal, fiberglass, or canvas between the crew and the street. The numbers from the Department of Defense reveal the scale of the crisis. In the first 4 months of 2005 alone, roadside bombs killed 27 U.S. troops riding in Humvees. That figure climbed to 67 just a year later, despite a surge in armor upgrades. In some months, improvised explosive devices accounted for up to 75% of all American combat deaths in Iraq. The Humvee became the most common and the most targeted vehicle in the war, appearing in nearly every convoy, patrol, and supply run. Inside each Humvee, the gunner stood in the most dangerous position, After-action reports show that turret gunners absorbed the brunt of enemy fire, suffering casualties at rates far higher than drivers or commanders. In documented ambushes, gunners were hit first in nearly every case. Hundreds of turret gunners were killed between 2003 and 2007, and thousands more were wounded, many with injuries so severe they never returned to duty. The open turret design left them exposed to bullets, shrapnel, and the full force of every blast. In the hardest hit units, the odds of surviving a major ambush as a gunner could be measured in seconds. The statistics do not just describe a risk, they define a job where survival often depended on nothing but luck and timing. Desperation turned soldiers into welders and scavengers. With factory armor in short supply, units across Iraq began piecing together their own makeshift defenses. In motor pools and dusty lots, crews hunted for scrap metal, steel plates from wrecked vehicles, doors from abandoned buildings, even fragments of destroyed Iraqi tanks. Welders worked through the night, bolting these salvaged shields onto Humvees in hopes of stopping bullets or shrapnel that the original design never anticipated. Some vehicles rolled out with sandbags piled on the floor, plywood tacked to the doors, or ballistic glass pried from other wrecks. The effort earned a nickname that stuck: hillbilly armor. For many families back home, reports of casualties and stories of exposed gunners were too much to bear. Parents and spouses pooled money to buy commercial-grade body armor and shipped it overseas when military supply lines could not keep up. Packages arrived in the mailroom: ceramic plates, Kevlar vests, sometimes even homemade armored blankets. Soldiers wore whatever protection they could get, regardless of official regulations. Commanders faced a dilemma. Some encouraged improvisation, believing any extra protection was better than none. Others worried the added weight would strain engines and suspension, risking breakdowns or rollovers. But for the men in the turrets, the choice was simple: trust scrap steel and luck, or face the streets unprotected. The scene echoed images from Vietnam, where GIS welded sheet metal to their trucks, trying to outpace a war that kept finding new ways to kill. In Iraq, that lesson was learned all over again, one armored plate at a time. On December 8, 2004, inside a packed tent in Kuwait, Specialist Thomas Wilson stood up and asked Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld a question that echoed across the world. Wilson asked why soldiers had to scavenge scrap metal and broken glass from landfills to armor their Humvees. Rumsfeld answered, "You go to war with the army you have, not the army you might want or wish to have at a later time." The line landed with a thud. The exchange, captured by reporters and broadcast around the world, ignited outrage back home. Within days, Congress convened hearings. Lawmakers grilled Pentagon officials about the armor shortage and the rising toll on American troops. Families of wounded and fallen soldiers demanded answers. The scandal forced the military's procurement system under scrutiny, turning a simmering crisis into a matter of national accountability. In 2007, the Pentagon launched a crash program to get mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, MRAP, onto Iraqi roads. Defense Secretary Robert Gates ordered the military to bypass routine procurement, making MRAP production the top priority. These vehicles came with a dramatic redesign, a V-shaped hull that deflected blasts away from the crew compartment. The concept had been proven by South African engineers decades earlier. Blast tests showed that a V-shaped hull could reduce fatal injuries from roadside bombs by as much as 80% compared with the flat-bottomed Humvee. Within a year, thousands of MRAP vehicles arrived in theater, and the difference was immediate. Convoy casualties from improvised explosive devices dropped sharply. Wherever the new vehicles were deployed, Enclosed turrets and remote weapon stations let gunners stay, protected inside, operating heavy weapons with cameras and joysticks instead of standing exposed. The hardware finally caught up to the threat, and for the first time, survival did not depend on luck and scrap metal. Combat in Iraq forced the U.S. military to confront its own assumptions about what keeps soldiers alive. After the losses and the public reckoning, survivability became a written requirement in every new vehicle program. Acquisition guidelines now demand that protection stands equal with speed and mobility, not as an afterthought, but as a baseline. Every major ground vehicle since the Humvee has been designed with armor, blast deflection, and crew safety as core features. The lessons from Baghdad and Fallujah are etched into steel and doctrine alike. Today, survivability is not a luxury or a field improvisation. It is a promise built into the frame, tested in blast chambers and codified in every contract. The days of sending troops into combat with hope and scrap metal are over. The cost in lives made sure of that. Today's armored convoys reflect lessons paid for in blood. Yet every new battlefield tests what we have learned. The real measure of military progress is not firepower, but how quickly we protect those we send to fight. Some sacrifices can never be repaid. Others must never be repeated.